Well, good morning. My name is Chase. I'm also one of the elders here, and we're going to be in the book of John. And I'm going to scoot this back because my hips don't lie. All right, so we turned to the book of John. We are finally into chapter 2. All right, we did it. It took us a while, but we did it. So we have transitioned from chapter 1 to chapter 2. So chapter 1 is like this, here's a big churchy word, the Christology, the understanding of who Christ is chapter 1 through 18. It's just words of who Jesus is. And like I said, John is going to go back and pull these themes that he's been talking about. Jesus is the Word. Jesus is the light. Jesus is God. And now as we kind of transition to chapter 2, I want you to, as we finish out the book of John, you need to understand that John has written this book for two reasons. One, for evangelism. He wants you to see that Jesus is who he says he is. He is the Son of God, both in what he is saying, what he is teaching, what he's expanding upon, but also what he does. And so John revolves his writing around 7 signs for the next foreseeable future for us. We're going to look at the first one today. Now, he calls them signs. They are miracles, but he calls them signs. They're pointing to something. So we're going to kind of talk through why Jesus did this. And another reason that John wrote this book is for evangelism, but he's also writing it for apologetic reasons, or that we can confirm that this is who Jesus says. That he wrote this so that we could find life in the Son of God. And so as we kind of turn our attention to the book of John, chapter 2, I want you to kind of understand that. Now, we are getting into the water and the wine. I know for some of us, this means that we can drink, this means that we can't drink. This is not a definitive text for that argument. All right? If you want to talk about that, I would love to talk to you about that. But this is not what this text is about. It's primarily about who Jesus is and what he has done. And so as we kind of turn our attention to this, I want you to be prepared. There's a lot of things here that I wish we could just be like a fly on the wall and see the emotion behind the things that are said and things that are done. But we're going to walk through this really slowly, and I've been chewing on it all week and up until last night and just trying to figure out what is exactly happening here. And I think there's a verse that kind of shows us that. And John gives us these summary statements after the signs. There's one after each one, all 7 of them. Well, really 8 if you count the resurrection, which that's a pretty good sign that he is the Son of God. But there's these little summary statements that John ends the section with, and I think the key is there. So we're going to get there starting in verse 1. Let's turn our attention to it. Here's verse 1. It says, on the third day, and there's some discrepancy on what is the third day. We know Jesus is entering into a wedding. And you need to know something. A wedding is not a one-night deal. At most, it could last up to 14 days. So at the smallest length, it's about 7. All right, so just budget that out for yourselves for a minute. All right, so there's an argument this is the third day of the wedding. There's an argument this is the third day from the days we looked at last week. So when Jesus calls those 5 first disciples, there's been 3 days later, so 3 days after that event. Does it really matter? No. This is a day that happened, and John is an eyewitness of that. On the third day, there was a wedding at Cana, and it's in Galilee. And so this is a pretty short walk from where we were last week. It's about a 20-minute walk, and Cana is a very, very small village. It's not very many. It's argued for sure less than 500 people. So this is a hometown, backwoods, hometown wedding. And Jesus is invited there. And we don't know if it's because his popularity is kind of growing. We don't know if it's because, we know Mary was invited. We're going to see that. So maybe Mary brought Jesus. So as we kind of continue on, this is all really important information as we kind of set the stage for what actually happens at this wedding. So it's, and the mother of Jesus was there. And Jesus also was invited to the wedding with his disciples. And here's the problem. When the wine ran out, the mother of Jesus said to him, "They have no wine." Now, Why is that such a big deal? And that is where all these questions kind of come up. Now, you need to understand something. This is not a wedding that happens in one day and ends when the cha-cha slide is over. All right? All right? So this is a long period of time. And so Mary comes up to Jesus and says, listen, they have ran out of wine. Now, this is why this is such a problem. It's not because they were about to do the cha-cha slide, now they can't. This is a huge social embarrassment on the groom. Now, this is an honor-shame culture. We cannot identify that as Americans. This is a honor-shame culture. This is like if you drop the ball, that's your identity forever. All right? So just imagine. This is kind of the story of what a wedding would have looked like. The groom would travel and meet the father of the bride, and he would make arrangements to marry her. And he would have to pay a dowry. All right? He would have to make a payment to purchase her as his bride. And this is a lot of reasons why Jesus refers to the church as the bride. Because Jesus left heaven, he came to earth, he made a payment on the cross, and he's gone back to prepare a place for us, and then he's going to return. That is the exact outline of an ancient wedding. All right, so the groom would go to a distant country, he would make a payment, he would go back to his home, prepare a place for the bride, and then he would go back to her home with this huge caravan of people, all of this stuff, all the news, all the jubilation, and then there would be this humongous feast, and then the bride would return back home. This is exactly the outline we see that Jesus is doing. Jesus has made a payment for his bride. He is going back to prepare a place for us. He will come back to us, and we will be with him forever and ever and ever and ever. Right? And this is what the wedding is happening here. So the groom, all the pressure is on the groom. So you brides, if you remember your wedding, just think of how helpful your groom was. And I know how helpful he was. Whatever you want, babe. Right? That's how helpful he was. Right? But this groom, he had to build a house for his bride to be. He had to make all the arrangements, he had to raise all the support, all the money, get all the volunteers. He had to prepare all of the wine and get all the food together, all the things. His whole year was devoted to this day. And so if you were an invited guest, you're missing at least a week of work to attend this wedding. So if that groom doesn't put out, and you miss 7 days of work, you better believe you're not going to let him forget that. Shame. Right? And this is why this is a big deal. It's not because the party's about to end. It's because this is a huge, shameful moment for this poor groom. Most likely, because we're in Cana, he's probably not the richest guy in the world. So, in fact, this is how shameful it was. As a participant, as an invited guest, you could literally sue the groom. You could take him to a court of law because you're bringing a gift to the wedding. You're missing 7 days of growing your crops, attending to your needs, and this guy's supposed to reimburse you. It's a legal obligation. And if he doesn't put out, you can sue. I mean, can you imagine that? Hey, beautiful ceremony. It was wonderful. You'll be hearing from my lawyers. All right? It's just like this is a strange thing, but this is the world that they lived in. So this is not just shame in the moment. This is shame in the future. Now, just think about all the things that are going to be whispered about this groom. That guy can't protect his wife. He can't put out for her. He's not going to protect her. He can't afford to keep her happy. He can't provide for his family. I mean, as a man, that's incredible. Like, that's one of the worst things you can say to a guy who's married or about to get married. You can't provide for her. This is why all men are afraid of their fathers-in-law, right? Because we know that's scary. There's a lot of pressure on the groom. And this is why this is a really big deal. So Mary comes to Jesus and says, hey, they're out of wine. Now, I don't know if Mary was like a participant in helping organize things. We know Mary was a very generous and loving person. So Mary probably could have been helped serving, or maybe she just found out about it. Maybe she went up to the cooler and realized, uh-oh, there's a problem. It's interesting that she comes to Jesus. And so most arguments are made that Joseph is not in the picture, probably because of death. And here's why. And I think it makes a very good argument. The oldest son would provide for the mom as the widow. And so I would argue that I think Mary is pretty used to going to Jesus as the man of the house. In fact, when Jesus is dying on the cross, one of the last things he does with Mary is says, hey, John, the writer of this book, you got to take care of her. He has passed on his responsibilities to John. That's how close John is with Jesus. So I would argue that Joseph has passed away, and Jesus is now the guy that gets all the errands. So when Mary sees a spider in the kitchen, or she needs her brakes checked or whatever, she goes to Jesus. Now imagine having Jesus in the household, right? Jesus, we're out of water. Done, right? I mean, that's pretty awesome. So if I'm Mary, I'm going to Jesus, right? I mean, it just makes sense. And it's interesting too that Catholicism, if you've come from that background, this is where we get the idea that we should worship Mary, because Mary has this kind of access to Jesus. So a lot of that theology comes from this. And it's a little weird to me because Jesus actually rebukes her. And this is the weird part. Let's look at verse 4. And Jesus said to her, woman, right? Now, I don't know about you, but I got a little, ooh. Now, if I did that, my mom would smack the hawk spit out of me. I don't know what hawk spit is, but that's what she would tell me. Look, if you do that again, I'm knocking the hawk spit out of you. I don't know what that means, but I'm terrified. I don't want to find out, right? I'm 30. I still don't want to find out what that looks like. But this is weird. And a lot of commentators try to soften it, because woman, you could translate it to ma'am, right? But still, it's not very it's not right. It doesn't feel right. And they also make an argument that Jesus actually calls her a woman when he's dying on the cross. He says, woman, behold your son. So some of the arguments that are made are Jesus is separating himself from Mary. So hey, you've raised me up to this point. I'm starting my official ministry here. Don't come to me with these small tasks anymore. Now, I don't really buy into that, because Jesus is definitely still loving his mom. But he definitely starts to make a distinction, because later on, there's a guy or a lady that cries out, blessed was the womb that you were born in. Jesus, no, blessed are those who do the will of the Father. And Jesus is teaching one day, and some people yell, hey, your mom and your family are outside. And Jesus says, who's my mom? Who's my brothers? It's these right here. So Jesus is making a distinction for sure. And even when Jesus was 11, we see this in the other Gospels, Jesus, and now imagine Mary and Joseph in this moment. They have went to the temple with Jesus, and there's this huge caravan leaving, and they think Jesus is up front probably, playing with all the other kids. And they realize about 2 days down the road that they have forgotten the Son of God. No big deal, all right? You shouldn't lose a kid. Definitely shouldn't lose the Messiah, right? And they go back to the temple, and what's Jesus say? Hey, I'm doing my Father's business. Now, this is probably not the best time to have the kids in here with us, because their kids are probably going, oh, okay, woman. No, I will not clean my room, woman, right? The Son of God has a pass here, okay? He is literally God in human flesh. Now, I'm not defending this. I don't think it's rude. I don't think it's out of his character. I don't think it's a misinterpretation. And I don't think we can really soften it. And we're actually going to come back to this verse, because we're going to actually end here. There's a very important thing that he says. He says, woman, what does this have to do with me? My hour has not yet come. Now, let's keep that in the back of your mind, but as we keep going, look what Mary says in verse 5. And his mother said to his servants, just do whatever he tells you. Now, I don't know if this is a sarcastic, oh, you'll do it. Servants, listen to this guy. Right? So I don't know. I wasn't there. I can't read into it too much. I don't want to put too much conjecture on it, but I don't think this is her sarcastic way of saying, oh, you'll do it. Right? Because every Christmas, what do we sing? Mary, did you know? She knew. All right? Don't have to ask the question. That girl knew. If an angel appeared in your bedroom and said, hey, you're about to give birth to the Messiah, you knew. All right, and so she's probably been aware of this, but also Mary is experiencing a lot of social pressure, because if Jesus starts doing some party tricks, you best know that Mary's going to be question number one. And it's interesting because you know how we said that when the groom would go and pay a dowry, they were legally binded and they were engaged in our terms. They're not married, but they're engaged. And this is why when Mary and Joseph are engaged or betrothed to one another and they're traveling together, like the question is, she's pregnant, right? But she's never been with a man. And so Joseph has some issues with that, understandably so. An angel appears to him and says, hey, it's all good. You just chill and follow what we're doing. And so Joseph and Mary go and they have the birth of Jesus. So now you got to think Jesus or Mary is probably being questioned a lot throughout his younger days. And so maybe this is where Mary's coming from, but she says to him, do whatever he tells you. That's great advice for the servants in this context, but it's also really good advice for us. Just do whatever he tells you. I don't like it. Do whatever he tells you. He knows what to do. He knows how to handle every situation perfectly, and has a lot better solutions than you and I do. But isn't it interesting how we go to him when it's like emergency? You can go to him now and do whatever he says. But I think what she's saying here is very interesting because she's referring to the servants. So she approaches Jesus. Jesus has this kind of a snark reaction. And Mary looks at the servant and says, just do whatever he says. So whatever he says or doesn't say or doesn't do or does do, just do it. So she's trusting Jesus to handle the situation however he sees fit. Now look at verse 6. Now there were 6 stone water jars there for Jewish rites of purification. So because this was a celebration, because this was a huge thing, the Jews had this idea that they needed to be purified ceremonially. All right, so before they would eat any meal that involved bread, this is before the meal and after the meal, some of them would have little cups of water and they would pour them on their hands and then they would let the water drip off. But these jars, most likely the Jews would stick their hands into the jars and pull their hands out and let the water run down their fingers. And it was a way of saying, I am ceremonially clean. Now, that's not Purell, okay? It's not Germ-X. But they're being made ritually clean. They're being purified ritually. And this is what Jesus looks at. So Jesus looks around the room, sees these jars of water. So each of them are holding 20 to 30 gallons, and Jesus said to the servants, fill the jars with water. And they filled them to the brim. This is important because, spoiler alert, he's about to turn this into wine. Okay? If you didn't catch that earlier with the beautiful reading, you need to understand that this is a very important term, because if Jesus said fill them up halfway, and as they were being transported, someone could have put something else in. Right? So they are filled to the brim. And he said to them, now draw out and take it to the master of the feasts. So they took it. When the master of the feast tasted the water, now become wine, and did not know where it come from, though the servants who had drawn the water knew, the master of the feast called the bridegroom and said to him, everyone serves the good wine first. When the people have drunk freely, then they'll pour wine. But you have kept the good wine until now. And now this is where it gets really interesting. So in verse 7, we see that there's this idea of they fill it to the brim, and then he says, now take it to the master of the feast. And this is like the master of the ceremonies. This is like the DJ. This is like the guy at the wedding. I was at a wedding last night, so a wedding's pretty new on my thoughts right now. So like the DJ is the guy that yells at everybody and like just has the mic really close to his mouth the whole time. And he's like the guy organizing everything. So whenever something's about to happen, he makes a big announcement and everyone looks at that scene. Hey, they're going to cut the cake. Okay, we got it. So this is like the guy who's organizing the party. And Jesus tells him to take it to that person. So when the master of the feast tasted the water now had become wine, you got to ask, whoa, when did that happen? Jesus says, fill up the jars with water, take it to that guy. And all of a sudden it's just wine. Like, it's just like a back pocket, like no look option pass, just all of a sudden water, it's wine. Like if I'm Jesus, I would have been like, let there be wine, right? Make a show about it, do something. This is your first one, Jesus, make it big, live it up a little. But it's just like, take some water, it's wine. It's interesting. Because what is wine? In wine, you need grapes, and to get grapes, you need vines. To get vines, you need soil and sunlight and water. But Jesus overcomes all of that and takes water that are used for hand washing, fills them up, it's wine. And you got to think, like, and the Master of Ceremonies says as much, this is perfect wine. This is like Garden of Eden level wine. There's no curse in the soil where this wine had come from. And Jesus serves this to the party. So why did this transpire the way this did? And why did Jesus use those jars? Because old covenant water, these ritual cleaning things that took place for all the Jews, it was a constant reminder for them that, hey, you're unclean. Not that you just have germs. You are sinfully unclean. You cannot be in the presence of God. You cannot be in the presence of others if you are ashamed. It's just shame upon shame upon shame, pointing us to something that we cannot obtain, and that's righteousness. So they're used to cleaning themselves, letting the air dry like doctors, and then they would eat and then go right back, hey, I'm still unclean, by the way, air dry. Now just imagine, that's every meal. Like we get tired of putting masks on, but they had to do this stuff all day long. And it was a constant reminder, you are unclean. So Jesus is taking old covenant water and making new covenant wine. And he's purifying something without us even noticing. So this miracle is about conversion and it's about transformation. Jesus is taking water and converting it into, transforming it into wine. And these jars of purification. So I think Jesus is foreshadowing the wine of his blood as the means of purification. Because what should be in those jars is a sign of purification. But what does Jesus put into those jars? Even though they're filled to the brim, he's saying, I am going to purify you through my blood. And at the Lord's Supper, I have to imagine the disciples taking the cup, sipping the wine, are thinking, and Jesus saying, this is the blood of the new covenant. It is my body. That's why we eat the bread. It is the wine. This is my blood. That's really weird. It sounds cannibalistic, like it's just bizarro. But it's an image, it's a picture to say that I am what makes you pure. I'm what makes you right. And it's a new covenant. And then here's this little this little summation. This is the first of his signs. Now, John will admit at the end that he did way more than just the ones he's put into this book. In fact, he says there's so many signs, a book could not contain all of them. But he's chosen these specifically because he wants to revolve our understanding. These are like courtroom witnesses. And this is the first one on the stand. It's the water and the wine witness. This is the first of his signs. In fact, we're going to see the healing of the official's son, the healing of the man at Bethesda, feeding the 5,000 with a Hebrew Happy Meal, pretty impressive, walking on water, healing the man born blind, that was the original thing, raising Lazarus from the dead, and his own resurrection. So Jesus, it then says, Jesus did this at Cana and Galilee, and this is, I think, a key here, manifested his glory. And his disciples believed in him. So Jesus manifests his glory in this story by giving a sign, or Piper calls it an acted out parable of his own death, his own blood. His hour will be the final, decisive, ultimate purification for sins. And so because he used those purification jars, there is no more ritual or any more for cleansing. There's one way to be clean before God. Is the glory of Jesus is that he alone, once and for all, made purification for sin. So you no longer turn to ritual. You now turn to Jesus. Old Testament covenant is ritual. You do these things, you're made pure. New Testament, new covenant, just do what Jesus says, as Mary says. That is fantastic news. You don't have to bring a goat to church with you on Sunday. You don't have to get your sins and your shame atoned for by ritual. It's done. And Jesus says, this is the first sign of what I'm here to accomplish. And Jesus performs these signs to underline and highlight and bold his teaching. This is what supplements it. Because in chapter 1, it was a lot of talk. He is the light. How do we know? He is God. Yeah, we'll see. Chapter 2, water and the wine. Done. Okay. Maybe you can create something out of nothing. Maybe you are a creator. Maybe you were there at creation. And he's just getting started, y'all. This is what he's doing with these signs. So back to verse 4. And Jesus said to her, woman, just feels so wrong. My mom would punch me, no doubt. What does this have to do with me? My hour has not yet come. In fact, when Jesus says this phrase, what does this have to do with me, it's literally saying, what does this situation have in common for you and have in common for me? That's what he's literally saying. You're bringing this issue for one reason. We're seeing the same issue. You're coming at it from this way. I'm coming at it from this way. So what does this situation, woman, have to do with me? Why are you bringing me into this? It's a weird question. But I think the key is what he says. This is the answer. My hour has not yet come. Now, Jesus talks about this hour 4 to 5 times throughout the book of John. And started connecting the dots there. He says, my hour has not yet come. My hour has not yet come. My hour has not yet come. Then the 4th or 5th time he says it, he says, my hour has come. You know what happens in that hour? He dies. So why is Jesus sitting at a wedding, doing the cha-cha slide? No doubt. I'm just kidding. Why is he there thinking about the hour of his death? I mean, we see in John 1, behold the Lamb of God who takes away the sins of the world. You know what that means? That guy right there, he's going to die soon. John the Baptist knew that. Jesus at the wedding, he's minding his own business. Mom comes up. Hey, they're out of wine. Can you fix that? Woman, what does this have to do with me? My hour has not yet come. So what is he saying? Because Jesus' primary mission was to preach good news and then bear our iniquities upon the cross. He says this several times. My hour has not yet come. There's 2 major concepts behind this phrase. 2 major concepts. It's purpose and time. Jesus knows his purpose. He knows his time. And he's telling his mom, it's not happened yet, Mom. It's not here yet. I know my purpose. I know my time. And Mary wants Jesus to do something, and you could argue for her shame. Some people argue that she was in charge of the wine. Some argue that Jesus or Mary wanted Jesus to do some kind of miracle to prove that she was not crazy and that she, in fact, was a virgin at the birth. I mean, can you imagine the scandalous nature of Mary's life? And now, for whatever reason, Joseph is not in the picture. She's probably feeling shame. We also got to remember that poor groom. Bless his heart. The father-in-law going, really? You ran out of wine? My daughter's wedding. And I'm joking a little bit, but that's deep shame for him. And the party's starting to catch on. They're contractually obligated to receive all of their wine. Lawsuits pending. This guy's life is ruined. This is a weird transition, but have you ever seen the movie Rocky? You know that scene where Rocky is, or Sylvester Stallone, whatever. Adrian. Anyway, he's talking to his wife, and they're talking about the fight that's coming up. I think it's the first one. And she said, are you going to be able to do this? He's like, I don't even care. I just want to prove to everyone back home that I'm not a bum. And I think that's sad, Rocky, that your motivation is to prove to people that you're not a bum. That's what's driving you. Then I think, is that what's driving me? Is that what's driving you? I mean, don't we pursue degrees and jobs and lifestyles to prove to people we're not bums? Don't we oftentimes do things to disperse shame from not happening? Don't we put a lot of pressure on our kids to excel so that we can prove that we are good parents? Don't we put a lot of pressure into our numbers as pastors to prove that we're not bad pastors? Don't we badmouth people at work to prove that we're not the worst one at the work? Don't we disperse shame like crazy? So when Mary comes to Jesus and says, hey, they're out of wine, Jesus says, what does it have to do with me? My hour has not yet come. You know what Jesus, I think, is saying? I have to die to cover that guy's shame. And I'm not dying here. My hour's not come. The only way I can cover the shame, the amount of shame that is being felt here, is my death. That's how I cover the shame. But I'll give you a sign that I can, and I will do that. I'll transform this purification water into wine. This is what I think Jesus is doing at this wedding. And it's funny because you want me to do something about their shame, Mom? What does that have to do with me? You want me to do something about their shame? I have to die. And it's not time yet for that. I know my purpose. I know my time. And I was at a wedding last night, and if you look around the wedding, you can always tell who's single. Right? Because they're always like, one day, you know, and you will get married one day. It's fine. But we daydream a lot at our weddings. We think back on our marriages. We think back on other weddings. It's a nostalgic time. When I'm at my wedding, I always think about my wedding, how my pants were too little. It's miserable, right? Food was great. Anyway, I'm daydreaming now. But it's interesting to think, what does Jesus think about at a wedding? His hour. Because the next wedding we see that Jesus is attending is in the book of Revelation. And it's the wedding where his bride is made perfect and pure, without blemish, without shame, no tears. And that wedding lasts forever, and they'll never run out of wine. So if Jesus came primarily to live, he's just an example. Therefore, we must live like Jesus to find God. But if Jesus came primarily to die, he's no longer just an example. He's a Savior. That's what his hour is about. Jesus coming is good news. Jesus coming and then dying in our place, that's gospel. That's great news. So, for example, if I had a lamp and you broke it, you broke my lamp, there's two options. You pay for it, or I say don't worry about it, which means I have to absorb that debt, or I have to go buy a new lamp. So you cannot forgive someone without suffering. Someone has to lose that. Either it's made right on their end, or you forgive that debt and you absorb it. And Jesus is so holy, he had to die in our place. But he's so loving that he was glad to die in your place. This is who Jesus is. That's why when you run out of wine today in your life, and you feel the shame coming into your world, when you fail in wisdom or power or resources, or fail to meet the righteous requirement of God's law, or fail to love the Lord with all your heart, you don't need to sit in the shame. Jesus, your Lord, your groom, the master of the great wedding feast, has infinite power and infinite love and is here with grace upon grace. So is your life full of shame? I have really good news for you. There's somebody that's invited in and can take care of that. And Jesus will provide the wine that we need. Just do what he says. And oh, by the way, that's why this book was written. I know you've never seen this verse before. Now, Jesus did many other signs in the presence of the disciples, which are not written in this book. But these written, the ones that John writes, are written so that you may believe that Jesus is the Messiah, the Christ, that he is the Son of God. And then when you believe, you have life in him. That's really good news. It's lonely and hard out there to carry your shame on your own. And it's even worse to try to cover your own shame where there is no wine. He can't run to Costco. Do they sell wine at Costco? I don't know. He can't run to the store and grab some wine. It's over. Shame. And Jesus says, I can fix that. But to cover your shame forever, I have to die. That's his hour. So let these signs lead us to the Son of God, to hear what he says about himself. And in hearing and believing, we can have life in his name. Let's pray. Father, we are reminded yet again that you are holy, that you are perfect, that you died a death that we deserved, that you took on wrath that we deserved, and you did it because you're holy, and you did it because you love us. So, Father, as we reflect and as we think upon these things, as we sing and as we worship, and as we are sent out back into our worlds, help us to know that we do not have to carry the shame of not being good enough, of not being enough, of not making the best decision, of not being prepared all the time, that we don't have all the answers all the time, that we can't cover all our mistakes all the time. It's exhausting, Father. And you whisper to us, come to me, all who are weary and heavy burdened. My yoke is easy and my burden is light. I will cover your shame. I will pick up the weight. Just do what I say. So help us as a church, as Mary has said, we just want to do what you say. Forgive us for not. Forgive us for taking on things on our own power and our own strength, just expounding the shame. Help us to bring our shame and our guilt to you. We love you, Lord. In the name I pray. Amen.